The movie is set in the distant future, where a global catastrophe caused by unrestrained exploitation of the Earth has almost wiped out humanity. The survivors now live in the space colony Kepler 209, where living conditions are extremely unfavorable. The inability to have children due to high levels of radiation is also a big problem. To find out if Earth is habitable and restore fertility, the ULIS mission was sent. However, communication with it was soon lost, and there was no further news. 15 years later, a second mission, ULIS 2, was launched with 3 astronauts, Blake, Tucker, and Holden. For Blake, this expedition is especially important because her father was on the first mission, and she intends to find out what happened to him. Their landing site is a mud flat near Henderson's Node, an important measuring station that sends data to Kepler 209. Unfortunately, the descent to Earth goes awry. The capsule collides with a tidal strip near a weather beacon. Blake struggles to reach shore and discovers Holden's body. She then finds Tucker with a serious leg injury and takes command of the mission. They find out that there is no more radiation on the planet, which means Earth is once again habitable. Blake goes on a reconnaissance mission and uses a biometer to confirm the presence of life in the water. She encounters an unusual jellyfish-like creature, but gets stung by it. Fortunately, medical supplies help with the wound. Tucker warns her of an impending storm, and Blake is eager to return to the capsule. On the way back, however, thick fog confuses her. Tucker fires a flare that helps her get her bearings. Upon reaching the capsule, Blake notices that a group of masked men are taking Tucker away. She tries to watch through the scope of her weapon, but someone sneaks up behind her and stuns her. Upon waking up, Blake and Tucker find themselves in a pit of water. His condition worsens, and she tries unsuccessfully to get the attention of the locals, called dirtbags. She is later helped by a woman named Narvik who speaks English. Together, they return to the pod for medical supplies. Blake begins treating an injured resident and secretly takes some of the medical supplies for Tucker. She notices that there are children in the community, proving that these people can reproduce. Tucker's condition becomes critical. He decides to commit suicide to end his suffering, despite Blake's desperate attempts to stop him. After his death, the tide fills the pit, threatening Blake's life. She is rescued by the man she healed and pulls Tucker's body out. The next morning, the kids take Blake away from her biometer, teasing her and dousing her with water until she tries to break free. Later, she is visited by Mela, a kind and helpful girl. Blake draws some pictures on the wall, and despite the language barrier, she manages to communicate with the girl. Shortly after Mela leaves, several women and babies are dumped into the pit with Blake. Blake looks out and is shocked to see the settlement being attacked by a group of armed men. Several people are killed and others are kidnapped, including Mela, who manages to get her hands on the red bag. After the attackers leave, Narvik appears and helps Blake and the other women out of the hole. It is then revealed that Mela is her daughter, and she decides to go to her rescue. Blake also follows her and expresses her willingness to help Narvik, but she is not sure she can trust this stranger. Soon they hear screams in the distance and rush to the sound. Climbing onto a cliff, they watch as the kidnapped people are transported to the ship. Desperate, Blake asks Narvik to fire a flare gun to distract the armed men, but she refuses as she intends to attack them directly. With no other options, Blake knocks Narvik out and quickly fires the rocket launcher. This draws the attention of the men on the ship who are heading towards the source of the beacon. Taking advantage of the situation, Blake dives into the water and climbs aboard the ship where she finally finds the red bag. But before she can get to it, the men return to the ship and she has to mingle with the prisoners. Soon they all arrive at the prison, where the prisoners are brought before a cruel guard named Palin. He sends the boys to work and takes the women and girls to their quarters. However, Palin soon notices that Blake is not from around here and decides to take her to a ship's captain named Gibson. When Gibson meets Blake, he greets her warmly and explains that they have been waiting for her arrival for a long time. He served under Blake's father during ULIS' first mission and remembers Blake as a child. The man says that when they first arrived on Earth, the inhabitants welcomed them warmly, and Blake's father was very close to them. However, one day they rebelled by destroying ULIS' capsule and messing up the communication system. It turned out that they had killed Blake's father during the house. Gibson explains that he built a huge dam from the wreckage of the ship and uses its turbine to generate electricity. He explains that this way the Kepler colony can survive on Earth if they ever return. At this point, a boy named Neil appears and interrupts their conversation. Gibson introduces Blake to the boy, explaining that he is his son. Blake is confused because the boy looks like a local. Gibson then explains that he adopted Neil after marrying his mother. After this conversation, he takes Blake to her cabin where she will have hot water and a warm bed. head. Blake is very grateful for the gesture, but left alone she begins to recall old memories of her father. The next morning after taking a shower, Blake notices blood between her legs and realizes that she is now fertile. Later, Gibson introduces her to a group of young girls who greet her with a rehearsed song. Blake then tells them about the space colony and is surprised to see Mela among the students. However, the girl doesn't seem happy to be here. After class, Blake wanders around the building and runs into Neil. He tells her that he doesn't go to class because his father gives him private lessons. They start chatting and the boy mentions a man named Christopher Columbus who taught him about trees and with whom he communicates through the ship's pipes. Upon hearing this, Blake is shocked and decides to find out more about the mysterious man. Later, she takes a map of the ship and heads to the cabin of the man Neil mentioned. When she reaches the door, she is shocked to find that it is her own father. At that moment, Gibson appears and begins to justify his lie by explaining that her father was actually a rebel leader because he fell in love with a woman from the human tribe. Then he opens the door and Blake walks in to meet her father after 15 long years. They emotionally embrace, but Blake is disappointed and hurt that her father betrayed the mission and abandoned her. The old man only declares that the Kepler inhabitants should never return to Earth to avoid repeating past mistakes. Upon hearing this, Blake is deeply moved and leaves in tears. Later, she talks to Gibson and tells him that she is now fertile. She explains that she only needs her biometer to contact Kepler and share the news. Gibson is genuinely happy about the news and promises to return the biometer, which is now in the hands of his men. That evening, as Blake is having dinner with Gibson and his family, the lights suddenly go out. Soon Palin arrives and reports that an intruder has broken into the house and knocked out several guards. Having learned about it, Gibson prepares to meet the intruder and orders Blake to go to her room. But on the way she is met by Narvik, who turns out to be the intruder. Narvik threatens her with a knife and demands to see her daughter. Blake is forced to comply. When they finally get to the girls' room, guards show up and stop them. Palin brutally beats Narvik and orders his men to take her away. Before they take her away, she manages to whisper to Blake that they are only taking the girls. In the next scene, Blake is treated by Gibson's wife, who notices that she has her father's eyes. Gibson also comes to check on her and apologizes for what happened. He then reveals that Narvik used to be one of his guards and then turned against him during the rebellion. Blake asks why he's only holding girls hostage, and Gibson reveals his horrible plans to breed them. He explains that these girls will be future partners for the astronauts returning from Kepler 209, and their children will lay the groundwork for the repopulation of Earth. Hearing this, Blake is utterly disgusted, but pretends not to be bothered. Later, when she returns to her room, she finds Mela hiding in her closet. Before they can talk, Palin knocks on the door and informs her that a child is missing. Blake reluctantly lets him in, but even after a thorough search of the room, he can't find Mela. Then out of nowhere, he starts hitting on Blake. She firmly rebuffs him, but he aggressively pushes her against the wall. At that moment, Palin hears a noise coming from the closet and goes to check it out. But Blake can't let him find the girl, so she reluctantly pulls him to her for a kiss. A few seconds later, Palin starts shaking and falls to the floor. A minute later, he passes away. As it turns out, Blake had secretly put a poison capsule in his mouth. Taking advantage of the opportunity, she takes the guard's weapon and together with Mela goes in search of Narvik. After killing several guards along the way, they reach the cell where the slaves are kept and are freed. Mother and daughter are also reunited in an emotional embrace. Meanwhile, Blake goes to her father, who directs her to a window and points to something. Gibson is indeed headed to the Henderson Center, which is unusual considering he never leaves his ship. The two quickly realize that Gibson must have the biometer and is most likely going to contact Kepler. This should signal the colonists that they can return to Earth. Meanwhile, chaos breaks out on Earth, with several escaped humans getting into a fight with the guards. Blake joins the fray as well and destroys several guards along the way. She eventually arrives at the Henderson Center, where she finds Gibson preparing to send a message to Kepler. Blake tries to stop him, but Gibson takes Neil hostage, threatening to kill him if she comes any closer. Blake believes it's a ruse, thinking he would never hurt his own son, but Gibson suddenly reveals the shocking truth. Neil is actually her half-brother, since they share the same father. He even shoots and kills the boy's mother when she tries to intervene. This barbaric act shocks Blake, and she has no choice but to lower her weapon while Gibson continues to send data to Kepler. While he is distracted, however, Blake takes the opportunity to push him into the water. She then strangles him underwater until he loses consciousness. Blake then faints and almost drowns. but Narvik rescues her in time and performs CPR to bring her back to consciousness. Afterwards, Blake and her father, along with the men from the settlement, make their way to the settlement on a tugboat. Meanwhile, Neil is going through the loss of his mother, and Blake comforts him. She gives him a matchbox, a souvenir from his father, to remind him that there are people who will take care of him. Soon after, they arrive at the settlement where we see several children who have managed to hide before. The children then anxiously watch several figures approaching them through the fog. When they realize that it is their kidnapped parents, they joyfully rush towards them. This is the end of the movie.